One of, I suspect, my dad and mother's schemes to try to teach me some responsibility was to have me earn money to buy a heifer. And her name was Mabel. And I paid $200 for Mabel. I was in junior high. Joined FFA, actually, first in the freshman year in high school at Ellick. And kept Mabel across the street and carried water to Mabel. But learned a lot and liked FFA, but really liked business courses. I was really good in typing and just liked that. And I had a great teacher, Francis Baker. And so joined FBLA, Future Business Leaders of America. And at a state conference in Norman at OU, one of the members said to me, I think you should run for national president. And I said, on a just kind of a whim, fine, I'll do that if you'll be my campaign manager. I hadn't been state president, I hadn't been local president, I just ran for national president. And we did all kinds of probably pretty silly things, like took construction paper and cut headbands and used probably Crayolas, I think that was before magic markers, and made feathers out of other colored construction paper and had some sort of a campaign card stapled on these headbands in the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C., and I had spent a glorious $7.61 on the whole campaign, but I was elected president, and the rest is history. So I probably should be a little more embarrassed about that now, but one of the things that I learned from all that is the value of application of knowledge. While I was serving as president, I was enrolled in a speech class over at OU, and I just hated it. It was awful. I can almost remember Mr. Horner was the teacher, and he was just terrible. And I hated to give speeches in that class. And the summer I took it, I was serving as president, national president of FBLA. And our convention was in Chicago, and we had about 2,000 or 3,000 people there. And so I had to take a week out of class, and it was just wall-to-wall speech after speech after speech after speech. And I think I did fine. I think I was more than acceptable. But I made a C, barely made a C in speech that very summer because I just saw no application to making those stupid speeches. So it, it kind of gave me a foundation in application. Had a little trouble getting through college at OU. I, as they say, was often on the dean's list. And I didn't know this until my dad's funeral this last summer, that my advisor and my dad were in close communication to try to figure out how to get me through college. But my good friend Bruce Gray and I would often brag that we had a 4-point when we graduated from college. And that actually was true. He had a 2-point, I had a 2-point, and 2 and 2 is 4 by anybody's books. But anyway, finally after 5 years and every summer in summer school, I graduated from OU, went to look for a teaching job in a glutted marketplace, more business teachers than they could shake a stick at, 2-point average, no reason for anybody to hire me. But because of my vocational student organization experience, I was hired in probably one of the best jobs in the state at that time. Teach at U.S. Grant, had a large business department, 13 teachers, and got into vocational education teaching there, taught distributive education, sponsored DECA, of course, and began teaching night school then, right off the bat. Liked it. I loved teaching adults, would teach 4 nights a week, lots of Saturday classes, plus the full-time teaching job. And then moved from U.S. Grant to become one of the, I think probably the state's first adult training specialist for the State Department of VOTAC in 1971, officed in Oklahoma City and Lincoln Plaza. And we set up an adult education program in marketing ed that has evolved now into what we see in business and industry training in our whole system. Had an opportunity then to go to Moore Norman Votech as assistant superintendent. That was when the school was just being formed. They had no land bought, no bond issue passed to buy land, so I was there to buy the first typewriter, to buy the first ream of paper, to write our first policy on how to purchase a typewriter and ream of paper. It was a wonderful experience. Stayed there 5 years and then went on to become superintendent at Canadian Valley and then here to the State Department. Okay. Like most times in Votech, the rumor mill had me here long before I even knew I was coming. I went to Lions Club in El Reno one day, and Lloyd Hensley, who was the ag teacher in El Reno, was in line behind me and said, "I hear you're going to become the next state director." And I said, "I don't think so. I didn't know Dr. Tuttle was leaving even." And he said, "Well, it hasn't been announced yet that he's leaving, and it hasn't been announced that you're going to be named." And I said, "Well, that's certainly news to me." I kind of forgot about it, and 6 or 8 months later, I got a call from our local vocational director down at Bing, who asked me to come to lunch. And I went down the next week to lunch, not having any idea what the topic was. And one of the state Votech board members, Marvin Stokes, was superintendent at Bing. And we got in Mr. Stokes' car and drove and drove and drove to Antlers, I think, and met Red Collins, who I didn't know, but who was another state board member. We're seated in a booth in a cafe in Antlers when they told me what we were there for, which was to tell me of their interest in me becoming associate director and sort of becoming an apprentice to Dr. Tuttle for a year or so before his retirement. I was just flabbergasted. I had no idea that any of that was in the mill. I thought I was going to retire from Canadian Valley. I loved my job. And when I got back to Bing and Mr. Stokes dropped me off at my car, I found the closest payphone and called the State Department and asked for Dr. Tuttle. Luckily, he was in, and I said, "Dr. Tuttle, I've just left a meeting with Marvin Stokes and Red Collins, and do you know what they were talking to me about?" For I feared that he hadn't been in the loop. And he said, "Oh, yes, Roy, and I think we should talk." And so things worked out, and I spent a year and a half as Dr. Tuttle's apprentice, following him literally every mile and learning a lot from him. People not only respected Dr. Tuttle, they were in awe of him. I was one of them. I was scared to death of him. If I, as a teacher, or even as I probably shouldn't confess this, but I will, but probably even as a superintendent, if I was in a situation where it looked like I might be meeting Dr. Tuttle walking down the hall and have to have a one-on-one conversation, I was so in awe, scared of him, that I'd kind of try to position myself around. Probably most people wouldn't think that of me, but I really was. But a lot of people were. He was just a legend. I mean, it was like walking around with Abraham Lincoln or something, you know. And I remember one of the first things that Barbara and I did was to go to a state directors meeting in Biloxi, Mississippi, with Dr. Tuttle and Vivian. And we were about to get on an elevator, had just gotten there, and the state director from Indiana, Geneva Fletcher, was introduced to me. And she looked up, and she was a little short woman, and she looked up with just the widest eyes when she met me and said, "Oh, you're going to replace Dr. Tuttle." And frankly, that was the first time that had ever hit me. And I spent most of my time with him just being amazed and impressed with the ability he had to build consensus among people, to sell people on vocational education. Just his communication skills were awesome. And he never let any of that bother him a bit, by the way. I think it's a compliment to describe him as a very, very common man, very down to earth. He didn't want to scare anybody. He loved teachers and he loved the kids, and I'd go to lots of things with him where kids were present. But he was particularly skilled at the legislature. And one of the things that I learned from Dr. Tuttle that I hope lots of us can remember to do is that when he was speaking to the legislature, they understood what he was saying. He spoke in simple terms. If he had some information to pass out to them, it wasn't elaborate and it wasn't complicated, but it told the story of vocational education. And he was highly thought of at the legislature. One of the fond stories I can recall is that we one day were at the Capitol and needed to see a representative and walked into the representative's outer office, and the secretary was typing. This was back in the days of the typewriters. And she didn't even look up. And so Dr. Tuttle and I were standing there, and she just typed away, and she said, can I help you? And a little bit curt probably, and Dr. Tuttle said, yes, we're here to see Representative so-and-so. And she didn't look up, and she said, he's busy right now, who's calling on him? And Dr. Tuttle said, I'm Francis Tuttle, and this is Roy Peters. Well, she didn't really stop typing, but she looked up at Dr. Tuttle and she said, Francis Tuttle? I go to night school at Francis Tuttle Votech. And Dr. Tuttle said, yes, my mother named me after that school. And he really just almost believed that, I think, that surely no one would ever name a school. Well, when I was hired as state director, I was hired at the board meeting in Lawton, Great Plains, and a TV reporter actually originally asked this question and said, you know, Dr. Tuttle's a legend, and what would it be like to follow a man like him? And I said, I assume that it would be somewhat akin to following a football coach, and I think it might be better to follow a successful football coach rather than one who had losing seasons. So I inherited a really, really good position. We were in good position nationally, and the footprint I hope I left as I leave this office is one of improving the quality of the programs, changing the programs to reflect the needs of the business and industry community today, insisting that our kids, our Votech kids, have the same rigorous academic course of study as the college prep kids do. I think I brought to the office a lot of memories of growing up when School to Work came along, and we began to talk about job shadowing. I remember following my dad, who was a superintendent, during the summers to other schools. We went over to Surreal and looked at their gym, kind of a state-of-the-art gym for the era back in the early 50s. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and he had asked questions about you know, the construction and who the contractor was and how much things cost. And so when job shadowing came along and people started talking about that, I could remember doing that and learning a lot from it. So hopefully the system is better when I'm leaving it as it was when I came, and I think Dr. Tuttle would be very proud of that. I never did understand anybody being in awe or frightened to talk to me. I just think I'm the easiest person in the world to talk to. And when someone, not often, would say, you know, that they were you know, I don't know, frightened, but nervous when they were around me. It really bothered me. Oh, I just would do anything to keep that from happening. And I just think I'm the kindest, gentlest person in America, and I just can't believe that anybody would be frightened of me. And I have never, ever done anything that would cause anybody to be frightened of me. When I came to the State Department, it was really a good organization. Dr. Tuttle had done a good job building it. When I was in the field, even at Moore Norman, and I think maybe even when I was teaching, I could remember coming to the State Department, and it was quite a trip. I mean, you know, it was an event when you would say, I'm going to go up to the State Department tomorrow, particularly when you were teaching. It was kind of a big deal. I don't know if it still is or not, but back then it was. And I can remember having to ask where so-and-so's office was because there was constant moving. People may think we've moved around a lot in this 13 years, but back then they were growing so quickly that there was just a constant shuffling of offices taking place. When I came, the organization was very, very traditionally organized. We had a deputy director who was a great guy, just a great guy, a long-time vocational educator. But I learned that I was supposed to go through the deputy to talk to people, and they were supposed to go through the deputy to talk to me. And that lasted about 4 or 5 minutes, I think. We just couldn't ever quite operate that way, and so he kind of took his little projects, and I went on about my way. The first personnel decision I made was to, in effect, replace me in my old job as associate director. And I think I was hired in October, and in the December board meeting, I think, I hired Leo Presley and Tom Friedemann as the 2 new assistant directors. It was very controversial in the field. Some of the old line superintendents, particularly some of the old line ag background area school superintendents, thought that the DE mafia had taken over. And they just were really concerned that what might happen to all of them. And of course, nothing did, and everything was fine. And Tom and Leo were both wonderful assistants, and they soon charmed the field in their own way. I think the difference between the department when I came and as I leave is that we're perhaps less compartmentalized. We're a much flatter organization. A few years back, we created the senior staff concept, which broadened the power base at the second level and brought a lot more people into the loop, and I think allowed communications to be a lot better. One of our good staff members said one time that, you know, there are only about 3 of you that know what's going on around here. And while it was said somewhat in jest, it did bother me a lot and inspired some reorganization that caused us to try to bring more people into the fold and, you know, give everybody a better understanding. I think people are perhaps more empowered than they were, kind of cut their own deals. I often see us doing something that I didn't know we were doing, or, you know, even, you know, printed material that I think back in the old days probably would have to have some sort of approval by me or an assistant director. And now people are kind of figuring out what their parameters are, and I think that's been good for vocational education.
Okay.
The big change in the system has been I think, a real focus. We still have some of this, but back then, I don't think we had really ever thought through specifically what our purpose is. We now call that our mission. And in the late 80s, we did a major redesign of vocational education as a result of going out and talking to our customers and our partners and our collaborators. And, you know, I can remember all those meetings, most of them at night and Saturdays, of flip charts scattered all around the room of work that we had been doing. And kind of the historic meeting, I guess, at Embassy Suites Hotel in Oklahoma City, where we had some community college presidents, Aerialville Tech School superintendents, comprehensive school superintendents, some of our staff there, fairly small group of people, but we really hashed out the mission and purpose of vocational education at that meeting, and walked out of there agreeing that our mission was to prepare Oklahomans to be successful in the workplace. Doesn't seem like it on the surface, perhaps, but a big change in what we had been doing. Historically, our mission was to prepare students to get a job. Fairly narrow mission, and probably didn't serve the students very well. But that's when we decided if you're really going to prepare a student to be successful, you've got to connect academics and vocational technical education and some work site learning along with it. Have some sort of a credentialing process and some standards that perhaps exceeded that you had ever thought before. And I think it really put us going the right direction.
Right.
I like to say that I was born into education. Literally grew up on the school grounds at Middleburg, a little small community between Blanchard and Chickasha. And my dad was superintendent, and Mother taught English there. And both my sisters and I were youngsters growing up there in our first years. And moved to Ellick when I started school. Started school when I was 5, and it wasn't because I was smart. It was because Mother didn't want to hire a babysitter. I'm always convinced of that. She still denies that. But my sister Jeannie and I were in the same class together. Now at Ellick, you only had about 23 seniors a year, and so there were about 23 in each class. And everybody took the same classes, except in high school, the girls took home ec and the boys took ag back then. And Jeannie would always bring her books home at night to study. And I don't believe I ever did that. And Mother was always inquiring as to why I didn't have homework and would be taking the same classes as Jeannie. And my explanation always was that Jeannie was just a little slower than I was, and it just took her a little longer to catch on. Now, Jeannie was valedictorian, and I graduated 23rd in my graduating class of 23, actually. And I don't know, Sammy Ramsey might have been a little behind me, but not all that much. When I graduated, Mother's teaching career was always based on the vacancies that Daddy had in school. And so if he didn't have a librarian, then Mother would next year be the librarian, but that meant she'd have to go back to summer school to get certified as a librarian. And so one year she'd be librarian, and he'd need an elementary teacher, so she'd go back. So about the freshman year in high school, I went to Norman with her in the summer and got a couple of jobs, one making donuts in the student union, working in the bakery in the union. And I hate to brag, but I made wonderful donuts. They were just spectacular. And the other, though, was working in a drugstore, campus pharmacy. And I was a soda jerk. So I get a job as a soda jerk in campus pharmacy with Bud Robinson. And during the school year, I'd, sack groceries down at the grocery store in Ellick or whatever. So when it came time to go to college, somebody asked me what I was going to major in. Well, the one thing I knew I wasn't going to do was teach school. I did not want to be in education because that's what my folks had done. So I thought it over a little bit and decided I'd major in pharmacy and go to Southwestern State College at Weatherford. The basis of my decision was that the drugstore was the only place I'd ever worked that was air conditioned. And I thought, well, this wouldn't be too bad, and it beats the socks out of teaching school and being a farmer. And so I went over to Weatherford and majored in pharmacy. Little did I know that it would have been nice had I taken a science class in high school, but I didn't. And honestly, I didn't because we didn't have science at Ellick. And so I flunked out. Technically, at the end of the semester, I actually flunked out much earlier than that, but they didn't tell you till the end of the semester, and changed to business, and then got into business education. Mother was somewhat the guidance counselor. We didn't really have a guidance counselor, and I think to some extent my dad was too. My dad was my Algebra 2 teacher, by the way. I took the first televised class in Oklahoma. A fellow who later became president of Southeastern State College, Leon Hibbs, was the TV algebra teacher. And my dad had a TV in his office, the only one in the school. And so we would go down, 1:30 in the afternoon, 7 boys, and take algebra. And we got so far ahead of the TV class. He was an excellent teacher, and I got more of my teaching skills watching him work than I'm sure I did through all the years of college preparation. But a lot of kids would come over to our house as they were getting ready to go to college, and I'd listen to my folks talk to them. And they really believed that everybody could be successful. They really believed that everybody could be successful. And oftentimes, if one of my friends was there who wasn't academically inclined, they'd talk to him about going to a junior college they were called back then. And then maybe they could go on. And I remember a kid that I bet you a quarter would be labeled special education in more modern times, who went down to Murray. Took him about 4 years to get out of the 2-year school, came to OSU, actually ended up with a master's degree in psychology, and went back to Ellick and farmed, but he had his education. And it just always seemed important that we remember that everybody can succeed. Well, Barbara's always been 100% supportive of whatever I was going to do. And, she had the responsibility, really, of mostly raising the kids. And while I was working seemingly night and day, back early on when I was state director, I would find myself having to put her initials, BP, in an evening on the calendar, so we wouldn't book 7 nights in a row of events, and at least have one night a week at home occasionally. And she's just always understood the job and been supportive of me in this role. Our daughter Jill turned out to be a recreational therapy major, And after she graduated, I asked Jill one day at lunch, I said, Jill, how did you end up as a recreational therapist? And she said, well, I went into my advisor one day and asked her what I should major in. I had to declare a major. And she pulled out a sheet of paper and looked it over and said, oh, Jill, I think you'd be a good recreational